All right, ready to dive into something that seems simple, but trust me, it's deep. Artifacts.
Oh, yeah,
You might be thinking, okay, artifacts, like museum stuff, right? But we're going way beyond that today.
definitely.
We're tackling the whole philosophical puzzle. What are artifacts? Do they even really exist? And how do they, like, mess with our thinking?
Exactly. And we're gonna approach this like we're explaining it to like a fellow philosopher, someone who's already got the basics but ready to go deeper.
Love it. Okay, so we've got excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on artifacts.
Yeah,
Buckle up, folks. Things are going to get complex.
they are indeed. So let's start with that classic definition, right? An artifact is something intentionally made for a purpose. Sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure, but I'm sensing a but coming here.
Well, of course there's a but. The problem is this definition, it kind of falls apart when we think about, well, it's called the continuum problem.
Okay, continuum problem. Why does that mess up our nice, neat definition?
Imagine a path, worn through a field. Did someone actually make it? Or did it just kind of emerge over time because people walk that way?
Ah, so it's like, where do you draw the line between, like, blue and green when you've got all those shades in between?
Exactly. That's the heart of it. Hard to say what is an artifact based just on intention.
So how do other fields handle this, like archaeology or anthropology? How do they deal with this blurry line?
They usually use material culture. So it's basically any object that plays a role in a culture. Doesn't matter how it got there.
Okay, that makes sense. But why are philosophers so stuck on this strict definition of artifact then? What's the big deal?
Well, for some, it gets into really big questions about existence. Like, some philosophers think artifacts don't really exist at all.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me my coffee mug is having an existential crisis right now?
Maybe. But it's an interesting thought, right? This actually goes all the way back to, like, Aristotle. Even he questioned whether artifacts were as real as, natural stuff.
So what's the argument against artifacts existing then?
Well, it comes down to this. Artifacts depend on us, on human intention. They wouldn't exist if we didn't think them up and make them. And some philosophers, they're called eliminativists, they take this even further. They say, no, everyday objects exist, not even rocks or trees.
Okay, now I'm lost. I can maybe get the coffee mugs not existing without a Potter, but a rock. Come on, it's right there.
It's about how much we can really know reality, apart from our own minds. Eliminativists say our categories, like rock, tree, chair, those are just mental things. They might not match up with actual reality.
So just because we see constellations doesn't mean those stars are actually connected.
Exactly. We're imposing our human patterns on the universe, maybe. Of course, lots of people disagree with this eliminativist view. Big debates, lots of counterarguments.
Yeah, I bet. That's a pretty wild idea, right? Saying the world isn't actually real.
It is, and those who do defend artifacts existing, they've got theories to back it up, like constitution views. They say an artifact needs human intention to get started, but once it's made, it's got its own properties, exists on its own.
So, yeah, a potter makes the mug, but once it's done, it's a thing, even if the potter, like, disappears.
Exactly. And then there are application condition theories. They're about when can we actually use the word artifact? What has to be true? It gets into the relationship between intention, function, and the actual object itself.
Wow. So even a basic question like, does this artifact exist, can get super complicated.
Absolutely. It makes us really think about how we understand the world, how we put things into categories. And, just when we think we're starting to understand if artifacts even exist, there's another layer. Artifact kinds.
Oh boy, hit me with it. What's so tricky about artifact kinds?
So let's say artifacts do exist, right? The question becomes, are these categories we make, like chair, hammer, are those real in the same way as like species? Or are we just grouping things based on what we need?
You're saying my Tuffy reading chair might not be a real thing. Philosophically, that's a tough one.
No, no, your chair's a real thing, but it's more about the category itself. Is chairness like built into the object, or is it something we like project onto it because of how we use it?
Got it. So not about whether individual chairs exist, but about the category, the whole chair idea.
Exactly. And of course, there are tons of philosophical views on this. Some people say artifact kinds are like totally arbitrary, just made up conventions for convenience.
So what if I started calling my coffee rug a sicky cup? Does that change its artifact kind?
Not necessarily. Some folks would say, yeah, you're just changing the word. But there are others, like philosopher Crawford Elder. He'd say some artifact kinds, like floor lamp, those do have a history, a function that goes beyond just what one person decides.
So it's like there's a family tree of floor lamps, each one kind of inheriting traits from the one before it. Almost like evolution, but for objects.
Exactly. He calls them copied kinds, meaning They stick around over time, so they have a kind of objective reality like natural kinds. But this doesn't work for every artifact kind, like neckties.
Yeah, true. A necktie is more about like social stuff, looking good, not some practical purpose passed down for centuries.
Right, and this is where Amy Thomason comes in. And he's a philosopher who says, yeah, human intention matters for artifact kinds, but it's more than just what the maker wanted it to do. Artifacts also have what she calls normative aspects, meaning there are like unspoken rules for how we're supposed to use them.
Okay, example of a normative aspect for an artifact then.
Think of a sponge and a paper towel. Both clean spills, but we wash the sponge and reuse it, right? We toss the paper towel. Those rules, that's part of their like artifact identity.
It's like artifact etiquette, sponges for washing, paper towels for tossing.
Exactly. So defining artifact is tough. Figuring out artifact kinds is even tougher. Which brings us to another big question. What about an artifact's function?
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What's an artifact for if it doesn't do anything? But something tells me this is going to be another one of those rabbit holes.
It is, but it's a good one to go down. So let's explore what different philosophers have to say about artifact function.
I'm all ears. Let's unravel the purpose of things.
The big debate with function is all about intentions. How much does the maker's intention matter for what the object's function is?
Because on the one hand, we make artifacts for a reason, but on the other hand, people use stuff in crazy ways all the time, right? So where's the line?
Exactly. Philosophers disagree on this. Some, like Karen Neander, say intention is everything. She's big on the difference between artifact function and like biological function. Natural selection shapes living things, but for artifacts, it's our intentions that make the function.
So if I use my shoe to hammer in a nail, is it a hammer now? At least according to Neander.
Could be, in that moment at least. There are other folks who lean this way. The Stanford Encyclopedia mentions, like John Searle. He even uses this term agentive function, meaning it's about how we give objects purpose.
But that seems kind of extreme, doesn't it? I mean, a shoe's a shoe, even if I do some weird DIY stuff with it.
You've hit on a key criticism there. Like, objects do have their own properties, right? That limits what you can do with them, regardless of your intention.
So it's like a battle between what the maker wants and what the object is actually like.
Exactly. And that's why lots of philosophers like these mixed theories. They say both intention and non-intentional stuff matters for function. Like Ruth Milligan, she says an artifact's function comes from like a history of being selected, being reproduced to do that thing.
Like a can opener's gotten better over time, right? Well, open camp. It's not just the first inventor. It's the whole journey of the object.
Exactly. And she brings intention back in by saying there's direct function, that history stuff, and then derived function, which is about the maker's purpose.
So even if my new can opener design is terrible, its derived function is still to open cans, because that's what I was trying to do.
Precisely. Even if you fail, the intention's still there.
So we've got this whole range of views from it's all in the maker's head to the object has its own say. But what about stuff that just ends up not used for its intended purpose, like all those kitchen gadgets people buy and never touch?
That's where proper function versus non-proper function comes in. And the Stanford Encyclopedia mentions Beth Preston. She's got a good example of a non-intentionalist view of function.
Non-intentional. So opposite of what Millikan was saying?
Kind of, yeah. Preston's focus is on how artifacts are actually used over time, regardless of the original plan. So that gadget in your drawer, it still has its proper function based on design, but it's also got a new non-proper one, taking up space.
Ha, love it. Even neglected, it's serving some purpose. Okay, so this deep dive into artifacts. Well, we've hit some deep questions about what they are, what kinds there are, what they do. But you said earlier they can even affect how we think? That's a whole other level.
It is. It challenges the idea that our minds are just like inside our heads, ready to explore how these objects can shape thinking.
Bring it on. Let's see where the mind really ends. All right, so we've gone through this whole philosophical maze, right? What artifacts are, how we categorize them, do they even exist? And now we're getting to the part where philosophy meets like brain science. How do these things, these objects, how do they actually affect the way we think?
It's a fascinating area. And the Stanford Encyclopedia, it points out that this pulls in stuff from, psychology, child development, all that.
Okay, so let's get specific. How do our brains handle all this artifact info?
Turns out it's not just about what it looks like or even what we use it for. It goes deeper. Like psychologist Paul Bloom, he says, we try to figure out the maker's intention when we see an artifact. Like, what was this made for?
So, like, if I find some weird gadget, but I kind of tell it's mean tea for sitting, I'll call it a chair, even if it looks nothing like any chair I've ever seen.
Exactly. Our brains are looking for the purpose behind the design. but intention isn't everything. Uh, Barbara Malt and Stephen Sloman, their work shows that, like, our goals matter too, and the context.
So if I need to sit down, anything could be a chair, right? In that moment, at least. Even if it's a table or like a pile of books.
Exactly. Our needs, the situation, it all shapes how we see and use artifacts. But then how do we even learn this stuff about artifacts in the first place? Are we born knowing it, or is it all from experience?
Classic nature versus nature, right? Is it in our genes to understand artifacts? Or do we just, like, figure it out as we go?
Yeah, and there are different theories. Some folks, like Gene Mantler, they're on the empiricist side. They say babies learn slowly through their senses. They figure out the difference between, say, a toy and a rock by how it moves, how they can interact with it.
So babies are like little scientists, always testing stuff out. That's that cute.
It is, but then there's another group like Susan Carey's work. They're nativists. They say we're born with some knowledge about objects, how they work. That guides our learning.
So it's like we've got this basic blueprint for understanding objects, artifacts included, and then our experiences kind of fill in the details.
Exactly. It's both nature and nurture working together. But remember, we're going for the really mind-blowing stuff here. Artifacts shaping our minds. Ready for that?
Hit me with it.
Ever heard of the extended mind thesis?
Nope, what's that?
It's pretty radical. Andy Clark and David Chalmers, they came up with it. Basically, they say our minds aren't just like stuck inside our heads. They extend outward. They include the tools we use.
So my smartphone is part of my mind. Now, that's a thought.
Well, kinda. Think of their example, right? They talk about Inga and Otto. Inga wants to go to a museum, so she remembers the address. Easy. Otto, he's got Alzheimer's, so he uses a notebook to keep track of stuff, looks up the address in his notebook, then goes.
Ah, I see where this is going. The notebook is like Otto's external memory, same way Inga's brain remembers things.
Right, and they say if that notebook was somehow inside Otto's head, like implanted, we'd say it's part of his thinking, no problem. So why does it matter that it's outside?
Whoa. So the line between using a tool and that tool becoming part of how we think, it's blurry.
Exactly, and that's just one idea. There's also distributed cognition, where thinking is spread out across people, objects, the whole environment.
Existable, real world, not just philosophy stuff.
Edwin Hutchins studied ship navigation, right? Super complex, but it involves the whole crew, their maps, instruments, the ship itself. Nobody has all the answers, but together they're like one big thinking system.
So it's like a team sports for the mind. But instead of just people, you've got objects on the team too.
Exactly. And we do this all the time, right? Cleaning up your desk so you can think better, using a calendar to manage your time. That's distributed cognition.
I never thought of it like that. So these normal, everyday artifacts, they really do affect how we think.
They do, but it goes even further, not just our thoughts, but our actions, our behavior too.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Examples.
Michel Foucault, he talked about how, like, buildings, especially places like prisons, they control how people act. The design, the objects, it all limits what you can do, even shapes how you see yourself.
So it's not just the walls, it's the whole atmosphere of the place that gets to you.
Exactly. And then there's Bruno Latour, his actor network theory. He said artifacts have like these scripts built in, that their design features make you use them in certain ways.
Like how smartphones are designed to keep you scrolling, clicking, all that. It's not just a tool, it's kind of controlling you.
In a way, yes. And this happens with simpler stuff too, right? A well-designed kitchen makes cooking more fun. A comfy chair makes you want to relax.
It's true. I definitely spend more time with my coffee when I'm in my comfy chair. So we started with, do artifacts even exist? And now we're talking about how they affect our thoughts, our actions, our whole being. They're way more than just objects.
They are. They're part of what makes us human, and they're made be humans. It's a cycle.
And there you for it, folks. Artifacts. From ancient tools to smartphones, from philosophy to brain science. Who knew they were so complicated?
Turns out, even the simplest things can be full of surprises.
So next time you see anything, really a mug, a chair, a path in the park, remember there's a whole lot going on beneath the surface. Artifacts are part of our lives, our minds, more than we realize.
And that's the amazing part. We make them, but they also make us.